Not so radical thoughts from the author of a new book. I'm Tonya Hall for ZDNet and Tech Republic, and joining me is Cory Doctorow, writer, journalist, blogger, and activist, and author of the new book, Radicalized. Welcome, Cory.
Welcome. Thank you. It's my pleasure.
So, for the tiny few who may not have yet had the opportunity to know who you are, give us a quick summary of your accomplishments and your misadventures.
Sure. I'm a science fiction novelist. I've written dozens of books now. I'm also one of the owners of a very widely read, long-standing website called Boing Boing, one of the original blogs. I'm a journalist and write for many news outlets. And I'm an activist with the Electronic Frontier Foundation. And I hold some honorary academic appointments. I'm a visiting professor of computer science at the Open University and a visiting professor of library science at the UNC and a research affiliate at the MIT Media Lab.
You are a profound writer. You've written on so many different areas, and specifically in fiction. This is your 11th fiction book. Radicalized was just released, in fact. Give us a quick book report.
Yeah, Radicalized, it's a collection of 4 novellas on kind of contemporary science fictional themes. I wrote them because I was experiencing a dire case of Trump derangement syndrome where I was experiencing real anxiety, and the way that I cope with that is by writing. So, one story is about refugees whose Internet of Things, subsidized housing, turns against them and tries to control them, and they seize control but then come up against danger. One is a story about Superman intervening in the near-fatal beating of an African American by the same NYPD cops who killed Eric Garner. He's there because they're following predictive policing tools that Bruce Wayne has sold to the NYPD, and that's had them venture into these neighborhoods and brutalize the people who live there. One story is about entitled, traumatized white dudes for a change not killing their ex-wives and brown people in mosques, and instead murdering healthcare executives whose bureaucratic choices result in the death of the people they love best. And one of them is about rich preppers in high-tech bunkers who discover that no matter how many guns you have, you just can't shoot germs.
It seems that all 4 of the stories in Radicalized have this kind of David slaying Goliath quality to them, but the outcomes really aren't that clear-cut, are they?
Yeah. I really feel like we put a lot of emphasis on what technology does and not enough emphasis on who it does it to and who it does it for. And so these are all stories about people who are trying to seize the means of information, to take control of their technological destiny. And it's not always clear whether or not doing that will be enough. I think it's a requirement to have a better future that your technology takes orders from you. But just doing that is not enough to make sure that you have a good life. It's the necessary but insufficient precondition for human thriving.
Staying with that David and Goliath theme, does delivering the right answers require small bands of motivated fanatics, or does it require resources and economy of scale that only a huge enterprise can muster?
I think that there's a middle ground, right? I think that the thing that the internet has bequeathed us, for better and for worse, is the ability of people to form fluid, large groups that can coordinate without rigid hierarchies for small projects that come together and then break apart very quickly. That's how people who care about a rare disease can find each other and offer mutual support. It's how people who have an important political cause can come together and make a shove in just the right direction at the right moment. It's also how people who want to carry tiki torches and march through Charlottesville wearing Nazi uniforms can find each other.
In the quiet stillness of the night, when you think about the intersection of technology, society, and the future, do you think about this with hope or with skepticism?
I'd say that hope is the thing that I try to bring to all of my work, and I try to distinguish hope from optimism or pessimism. I think optimism and pessimism are kind of fatalistic belief that either you don't need to worry about stuff because it'll all work out okay, or no matter what you do, it's all going to be terrible. And I think hope is the belief that human beings make a difference to history, that history is not foreordained, that the reason we can't predict the future is because it changes based on what we do. And one of the things that I think we can do with fiction is provide what Rebecca Solnit calls hope in the dark. Hope in those dire moments that maybe if you take one step to materially improve your situation, that you will, through that step, find a new vantage point from which a new step reveals itself. And that step by step, one step at a time, we can find our way up a gradient towards a better life. In computer science, we have this idea of hill climbing. when we have intraversable terrains, terrains that are too complex to know, and we want to somehow get from one side of the terrain to the other. We have this analogy to a kind of ant with forward-facing eyes, right? So it can't look up and see where the high ground is. So instead, it pulls its legs and says, which leg is on the highest ground? And it takes one step in that direction. And now its legs are rearranged, and it takes another step and another. And in that stepwise way, it can ascend a gradient towards a local maximum. And those rules of thumb, that only require that you know what your peak looks like what constitutes uphill, and that you have a way to examine your surroundings. And if you have that situational awareness and you have a goal, you can traverse any terrain and find your way to the closest point to that goal.
So the future, and this is really portrayed in your book, I think this certainly is very much an example of each story. The future is based on the decisions that we're making today. So in the process of hill climbing, as you call it, what decisions are we making today that can help or hamper that progress?
I think the big thing is that we need to be, we need to really realize vividly what the consequences are down the road of the choices we make today. There is a problem when you have problems whose cause and effect are separated by a lot of time and space. Climate change is a really good example. If every time you turn the key on your car, it got a little warmer and the sea levels rose, you would know immediately that climate change is real and that we needed to do something about it. The consequences are that dire, but they're 40 years away. And so there's a lot of room for ambiguity and also a lot of room for people to manufacture ambiguity that's kind of self-interested. We are in a kind of race between the moment at which the problems created by our inaction or bad action tip over and are so manifest that people can't deny that it's a problem anymore, and the point at which it's too late to do anything about it. I call it like the race between denial and nihilism. And there's always this risk that, if I spend years and years trying to convince you to care about the population of rhinos, and the day that you finally care, there's only one left, that you might turn around and say, if there's only one left, we might as well find out what he tastes like, right? And so getting people to care before it's undeniable, right? Getting people to care about climate change before we're like digging through rubble with sticks looking for canned goods and drinking our own urine, right? Getting people to care about privacy before the ruptures are so vast that they've ruined so many lives that we're in total social disarray. Getting people to care about monopoly before the monopolists have choked out all possibility of correcting monopoly with smaller firms. That's really important. And that's the thing that I think fiction really does well, is it brings people to that point where they're ready to take action before the point where it's no longer possible to deny that action is needed.
Recently, presidential contender Elizabeth Warren has proposed breaking up the tech giants. Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts on that?
I think she's onto something. I just don't think she's going far enough. And I'm a little worried about some of the language in her proposal. So until the Reagan years, it was illegal for companies to grow by merging with their largest competitors or by swallowing their smaller competitors. And because of that, we had a very diverse landscape. And you may remember that 1979, the year that Ronald Reagan was elected, was also the year the Apple II Plus came out. And we've had 40 years of tech growing up without any real antitrust breaks. I mean, I think the last chance we had to think about antitrust in tech was the Microsoft antitrust suit, and it ended with a relatively toothless settlement that I think sent a clear message to everyone who's practicing law for big tech firms that the sky's the limit and all bets are off. I think that when you see 15 million Americans between the ages of 12 and 35 leaving Facebook in a year, the largest number to ever leave Facebook, but all of them signing up for Instagram, you can immediately see that it's a bad idea to let firms grow by buying their competitors, because we can't discipline them with our choices if we don't have any choices to make. If every choice leads to the same shareholders, the same firm, the same management team. And so it's great that Warren is talking about this. She exempts some pretty important monopolists from this, right? She effectively exempts Apple, even though they operate this two-sided market where they prohibit people from selling their copyrighted software to people who own Apple computers unless Apple, the company, can take 30% of the revenue from that customer. And they use copyright law to do it, which is really ironic. You wouldn't think that copyright law could be brought to bear to prevent rights holders from selling their works to the audiences for those works without the say-so of a distant corporation. And so she leaves Apple off to one side. She also leaves the other monopolies off to one side. So if we're talking about breaking up big tech, we also have got to be talking about breaking up big content. The fact that Disney has been allowed to buy Fox is disgusting, right? We also need to be talking about breaking up big cable and big telecoms. The other thing that I'm a little worried about is she paraphrases something in her passage on protecting creators that comes straight from the European Union's legislative committee, jury. And these are the people who yesterday or the day before yesterday passed this new copyright directive that is the most sweeping and most damaging internet rule ever introduced in the West, right? It's really the beginning of Chinese-style internet regulation in the West. It requires that everyone who has a platform will now have to have a filter to block copyrighted work from being uploaded by their users algorithmically, and that these filters will have to be very aggressive. They're going to have to block transformed or degraded versions of copyrighted works that people might use to try and evade the filters. And that means that you're going to have huge swaths of legitimate speech, tweets and images and all kinds of things being blocked both maliciously and inadvertently. And to have her quoting that is really worrisome, especially given the noticeable absence of any call to break up the big entertainment companies at the same side. As a creator, I see that big tech and big content are sitting down to make a meal of me, and I don't really care who's getting the bigger piece.
Let's talk about you and your being a creator. How do your own personal life experiences influence your characters?
Well, every person who's ever lived has only ever known what one person was thinking, and that's themselves, right? One of the things that makes all fiction into a kind of science fiction is all fiction starts from the premise that there is a thing called telepathy, right? Whether it's Jane Austen or George Orwell or Isaac Asimov, we all have this pretense in our books that you can know what some other person has ever thought. And that's a thing no one in the history of the human race has ever done. And so as a result, all of my characters have to come from my life experience. There's no other experience I have. Even the life experience of the people who I know and who've talked to me, it's all filtered through my own lens. I wrote a novella once, called After the Siege, that was based on my grandmother's life experiences as a child soldier during the siege of Leningrad. And, I tried to channel what I knew about her and her experiences. The reality is she was very reticent to talk about it. And it was the fact that she'd almost never talked about it. And then one day finally opened up. We were in the former Leningrad in St. Petersburg visiting family. And we started walking around, and it was the white nights. The sun was not setting because it's such a northerly latitude that at midsummers, the sun stays up all night. And in this kind of weird, timeless time in the middle of the night, she started pointing out landmarks and saying, I carried a body out of that building. I saw someone who'd been half eaten on that corner by cannibals, and those experiences were very vivid for me, but I don't have the pretense that they were really faithful to my grandmother's experiences. And one of the reasons that it was so vivid and so meaningful to me is because she almost never talked about it.
Very personal. It's obvious that, your creativity is part of who you are, and you're a big proponent of open source at the same time. So is that why you chose to publish without digital rights management software applied?
I think there's lots of good reasons to not want digital rights management. I think for one thing, digital rights management as a practical matter doesn't stop people from sharing books without permission. It's not hard to remove DRM. Everybody does it. It's kind of a consensus hallucination that there is such a thing as DRM. So it's this fool's errand doesn't help me convince people not to get my books for free. It only frustrates people and pushes them into pirate channels. At the same time, because of this 1998 law, the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, and specifically Section 1201 of that law, it's illegal for anyone to remove DRM, even for a lawful purpose. And that means that every time I sell a book with DRM on it, my readers are locked to that platform, and no one, not even me, can authorize them to remove the DRM and migrate to a rival platform. It's like selling books at Walmart on the condition that they only ever be read under a Walmart light bulb and shelved on a Walmart bookshelf and read while sitting in a Walmart chair. I understand why that's good for Walmart. I don't understand how that's good for me. And it would be pretty naive to assume that once Walmart controlled the entire value chain that my audience was relying on, that they wouldn't squeeze me, because they would know that I couldn't leave Walmart because my audience wouldn't follow me out of it. So I would never willingly try and lock my audience into some distant corporate platform, because the distant corporate platform is going to use that to squeeze me in their supply chain.
If you could sit alongside your readers as they were about to enjoy your work, what would you whisper to them as they embark on page one?
Turn off your phone. It's really hard to concentrate when you're getting alerts. No, I wouldn't say anything. I think the work stands for itself. My friend Stephen Bruce is a wonderful science fiction writer and actually an old-time computer programmer from the 70s. He has this great quote. He says, telling someone that they wrote a bad book, it's like telling them that they've got an ugly kid. Even if it's true, it's too late for them to do anything about it, and they probably did everything they could to avoid that. And I feel like the corollary of that is like trying to explain why my book isn't bad or why it's good kind of misses the point. If it doesn't sing to you, then it doesn't. And there's enough of my fiction available for free out there that you should be able to get a pretty good idea of whether or not this kind of thing is your kind of thing. Particularly, this is the first book I've done in many years that has an audiobook that's done by a major publisher. I usually produce them myself because with Audible controlling the whole audiobook market and me refusing DRM, there was very little market for my stuff. I had to sell it and make it myself. So I was out there paying thousands of dollars to get Will Wheaton and other amazing narrators to record it. But now Google has launched a competitor to Audible that's DRM free. And you can get the audiobooks from Google Play, and Macmillan Audio did the audio for it. Again, we still have Will Wheaton. It's recorded in the same studio where I've been going into near my place in LA. So it's great. It's and it's superb. And if you don't want to, if reading's not your thing, you can get the audio. And some of the fiction in it, one of the stories, Unauthorized Bread, is now being adapted for TV by First Look, which is the TV studio that's owned by The Intercept.
Nice. Cory Doctorow, writer, journalist, blogger, and activist, and author of his most recent work, Radicalized. If somebody wants to connect with you, Cory, maybe they want to find out more about your book, maybe they want to get a copy of your book or just your work in general, how can they do that?
Well, the book's sold wherever you get your books. I understand Jeff Bezos has a small bookstore on the internet. That's one of the places. You can also get them direct from me, the ebooks, at craphound.com. Craphound like poop and dog.com/shop. They're all sold without DRM. I'm my publisher's retailer, so I get the share that Bezos would normally get. I send the rest to my publisher. They take the share the authors gets and sends it back to me. So it's a way to especially support the author if that's your thing. But you can get it in bookstores all across the country. I've been on tour signing them. And if you want to find me, I'm usually the first Cory in Google. If you just put Cory into Google, I'm usually the first result. I'm Doctorow on Twitter. I'm one of the owners of Boing Boing, and my personal site is Craphound.
Perfect. Thanks again for your time, Cory.
Thanks.
Absolutely. And if you guys want to find more of my interviews, you can do that right here on ZDNet or Tech Republic, or go to my website, tonyahall.net. I've got links to all my social sites. Thanks for watching.